What's going on, everyone? Welcome to part 7, I think, of my roll-around workbench build. I got the Kreg Precision Lift router table, router plate installed in my workbench. Come check it out. Alright, so once I get the corner radiuses cut out, now it's time to go and cut out the rest of the jig using a flush cut router bit. It's got a bearing up here at the top that'll ride right along this frame and keep me cutting straight to get this size of a hole cut out of the MDF face. So let's get to it. So when cutting this out, I want to make sure that I do it in a couple passes. I mean, this MDF is 3/4 of an inch thick, plus I'm going to have to move it around so it hangs off of my workbench so I don't cut into the work surface beneath it. But also I got to make sure that I don't get into the corners, because this bit is a smaller radius than that 1.5" Forstner bit that I use to cut these holes. So I just got to make sure I don't get down into the corner, because that'll change the radius. Now that could change the fit of how the router plate fits in the hole in the work surface once that's cut. So just something to keep an eye on, something to watch for. Alright, so based on measurements of the size of the router plate, the available space underneath to hang the router, there's a support, or a 1/2" plywood support. It runs basically right about here. This is probably the best place for the router plate. So that's going to mean I got to remove some of the T-track and then use the jig that I just made, set that in place to get the location exactly where I need it. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the router plate and the jig that I made to set the depth of my router bit. I'm going to set it a little bit deeper than it needs to be, because I would rather have the router base sit just a hair below the surface, and then I can level it, which I'm going to show that in a little while, So I'd rather it sit below the surface just by a hair than to sit above and have to come back and reroute it. So if it sits below the surface, that's fine. I can manually get it level. So I'm using the router base and the jig to set my router depth. And I've got it almost right where I want it. Rather it be just a little bit high, like, you know, like a 64th of an inch or so, if that. I mean, if I really wanted to, I would go and dig out my feeler gauges and get it, you know, just a hair, but eyeballing it and seeing how much it rocks, that'll be fine. That should be good. All right, let's go ahead and start getting the hole cut out for the router plate. Alright, so now that I got that all routed out, I'm going to drill a hole and I'm going to cut out the middle section with the jigsaw. Doesn't need to be real accurate. Basically all I'm doing is I'm creating a shelf for the router plate to sit on, a hole in the center for the router to mount. So the center section cut out doesn't need to be real accurate. So let's get that drilled and cut out. Alright, so after cleaning up the hole cut by the jigsaw and sanding down a couple of little tight spots along the edge, plate helps right in. Now, there's a couple of gaps along the edges where the router kind of like tipped a little, but I'm okay with that. I mean, it's a workbench, it doesn't need to be perfect, but there's very little side-to-side motion. Once I get it screwed in and everything, this thing's not going anywhere. Plus, let me see if I can show you here. I'm not really sure how well you can see it, but there is a slight lip, which I'm okay with because I'm gonna use some nylon nuts coming up from underneath to push this up on the four corners and get this level. So let's mark the mounting holes, get those drilled, I'm going to be using threaded inserts for these holes, and then I will get the holes drilled and the threaded inserts put in place for the nylon nuts to get the plate level. that one ran into the support underneath. Not going to work. So this is how it is right now. All I gotta do is bring up those nylon nuts from underneath and they will push up on the plate till it is perfectly in line with the surface. Now that the router plate is fully installed and I got the router mounted underneath, I'm going to start working on the next parts. I'm actually cannibalizing one setup to get this installed. I have the Cobalt router table that I bought a while ago that I was originally planning on using on this build. However, the size of that table and the amount of space that I have available just didn't work out, and that's why I ended up getting this router lift. Overall, I think this is probably a much better choice, and I should have looked at this to begin with. But, you know, live and learn. But I am going to be using the fence that came with the Cobalt router table, mainly because I have it. I can make it work with the T-track, and it has integrated dust collection already set up. That saves me from having to build a router fence. But at the same time, so in order to use this, I'm going to have to connect this router port, or this dust collection port up to my, I don't know if you can see it, my port that I use to run a hose for general cleanup. So that'll just have to route there. But I did, when I built this bench, I did run a dedicated dust collection PVC line for the router table. So what I'm going to do is underneath here, if I can get a good angle of it, I'm going to build a box around the router. And that's going to allow me to, I'm going to enclose the router, but I'm going to put a dust port on the bottom that'll run down and then underneath and come out here for added dust collection. Hopefully that'll just help with all the dust. But also part of this then is I have the power switch that came with my Cobalt router table. So I'm going to mount this. I'll plug the router cord into this, run this over to my independent switches that I have over on this side, which you will have seen in probably the previous video. I don't know how well you can see in there. Probably not really, but I have that power strip. And I have lines dedicated for the table saw, the miter station. I'll now have one for the router. But it leaves me, again, like I did with everything else, a redundant, not redundant, but a double safety as far as power goes. I can turn the power off over at that switch, and that way if I should accidentally bump this while changing out bits or anything, this won't turn on. It's the same thing with the table saw. The table saw I can turn off at the power strip, and that way if I'm changing a blade and, you know, rather than having to unplug the saw or having to, that way if I accidentally bump the power switch, again, it just gives me redundant power. Now it does make things a little bit more of a pain in the ass having to, you know, turn on two power switches, but I prefer the safety over the inconvenience of two power switches. So I'm going to get to working on building the box on this and running the power for the router. as you can see, the first location that I went to mount the power switch didn't work. The corner here of the lift mechanism for the router was hitting the switch, so I just moved it. And actually I like this better now. It actually just looks cleaner, it takes up less space, it looks like, so it all works. So now I'm going to get to working on the box around the router for the dust collection. I'm going to lower the router all the way, and that way I can see exactly where the bottom of the box needs to be, and I can get to just building something. And I'm just going to use some scrap plywood I have lying around to enclose the router. So there I have the dust collection line that'll come up to underneath the router. However, I need to get a piece of 2-inch PVC pipe just to glue in there someplace so that I can attach this. The coupler here is too big for that to fit. So once I get that done, once I get a piece of PVC, I just ran out getting this part all set up. So once I get that done, then that'll connect up there, and then I just need to come up with a door, something to cover this up that's easily removable, but not important right now. So that about wraps up the installation of the Kreg Precision Lift router base plate table. The only thing really left to do is I gotta get that piece of PVC so I can attach the dust collection hose to the bottom. I gotta figure out a cover for the router just to enclose that box under the router. And then I need to install put the T-track back in that I removed and install some other T-track to act as a guide for the fence. The fence I stole, repurposed from my Cobalt router table. That's where the router came from also. So I'm gonna install some T-track for that, so that I'll have a fence and I'll also have the dust collection built into the fence already taken care of. And of course, once I get all that done, then I need to address the inevitable mess that always ends up when working on projects like this. But thanks for watching. Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button, hit the bell so you get notified when new videos come out, and I'll see you all in the next one.